No mai haere mai, ko Shannon Dowsing taku ingoa, welcome to the Exchange Cafe. We come together to share conversations and resources about climate solutions. We're fortunate to have Barry Soutar in the office today. Barry, been together for a long time now, doing our mahi in Tairāwhiti, a few years. You are someone known for wearing multiple hats and helping organise a lot of people to do things, but also the co-founder and executive director of TORO Technologies. Do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and what your mahi is?
I was just chuckling because you're absolutely right. I think the saying is what do they call it? A jack of all trades and a master of none. That's what one old crow from the coast once quipped about me when I was a young fella, and I just realised at the end of my working career, still the same. But I think there's value in a place like the Tairāwhiti in being a generalist, because the nature of the scale of our economy and the scale of our communities here on the Tairāwhiti and in New Zealand in general means that what we used to have as an advantage in the marketplace around this so-called thing called a number 8 wire mentality, meaning that we'd get in boots and all and try and solve problems with whatever the resources are that we had. I think that is now going to stand us in great stead going forward. So so Barry Soutar, Ngāti Pou. TORO Technology is a systems integration software development company. We were born out of an experience here in the Tairāwhiti where a company called TORO Studios spawned 3 companies, and TORO Technology is one of those. TORO Technology is just a little over 2 years old, and it's really a critical pivot point in the startup of any company as to whether you're still alive at that stage. But usually by about year 2, you've tested a few things in the marketplace, and so we understand some stuff. I think the advantage that we as TORO Tech have is that our leaders, our co-directors are all internationally experienced businessmen, have built significant operations both in New Zealand and offshore, and our market is twofold. Our market is domestic and also overseas. So on one hand, we've been able to build enterprise application integration platforms. So what that means is sophisticated platform development to help companies scale into markets overseas, where that company has a channel into market but is perhaps struggling to scale. So we join forces with them, we partner, we build the tech platform for that, and generally that's going to be an e-commerce platform, and we take that risk and then we take a share of their sales and market. So it's not a new business model, but it's one that's working. So we've got about 3 of those in the pipeline. We can do about 3 of those a year, just because the nature and sophistication of those things takes up quite a bit of time. And then what we've got is an operation here in New Zealand. So the purpose of the company was about uplifting young Māori and helping from challenged regions and helping them connect to international tech opportunities without having to leave home. And that's working well. If you were a young person of any ethnicity living in Auckland, it's really tough to be in the tech sector. You'd have to have a decent tertiary degree and 5 years of commercial experience just to be an intermediate developer in a place like Auckland. And Auckland is just like most cities around the world. Try doing that from Gisborne. It's fairly impossible. But we've managed to crack it, and the way we've done it is we've discovered that in the whole software development cycle there's a place for Māori or young Māori in the early stages of their careers, at the beginning and at the end. So it user design and it user acceptance testing. And and then that allows them to ride shotgun with a senior on the way through, and we've got 100 seniors in our partner company out of India.
Amazing. So I guess you may call yourself a jack of all trades, a master of none, but I'd argue that you're quite the master navigator. You form relationships globally. It's how I know you through your work taking Mission Island and Māori entrepreneurs to Ireland to understand what delivery of long-term digital strategy looks like, and how to link the ties between education and industry, and what volume of graduates you need to support and sustain ongoing business growth, and that was something that I personally found invaluable, and I think and I still have relationships from that trip that have helped my personal business to succeed. So I certainly don't think you're a master of none. Maybe it's a master of maybe it's a master of talk, but we definitely need those too. And I guess on that note, you were recently in San Francisco. Was to take part in the multi-stakeholder forum for just transition at APEC.
Yep.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the kaupapa there?
Yeah, so at APEC 2018, I think here in, or was it a little bit after that, here in New Zealand, that was the one in Auckland, Māori were given a little bit of a opportunity at that APEC around coordinating at least some indigenous engagement. One of the results of that was this idea that moving forward with the biggest challenges on the planet, that perhaps there was a requirement to have a much broader engagement in the decisions that are going to be made collectively as the APEC group of countries, which is pretty significant. You know, the power base on the planet is around the Pacific. If you think about the countries and around the coast of the Pacific, you know, China, Russia, Southeast Asia, Japan, and US, Australia, and New Zealand, etc. So given that climate change is the biggest challenge to the whole world, because it just crosses so many of the big systemic issues of the planet, and the acceleration that's undergoing. What that means is that you can't leave the decisions around our future as a planet solely to the people who would normally attend something like APEC. So APEC is really a forum that's where the governments come together, and then secondly where big business comes together. And if you just left the decisions, the world, countries don't have a right to only have those two representations at such critical moments in the history of the planet. So what APEC invited was a curtain raiser 4-day event to allow a mix of cross-sector perspectives on this whole idea of the push towards carbon neutral economies and what the impact is going to be on different sectors. And in amongst those sectors are youth, there's gender, and indigenous is one of those as well. So we went from New Zealand as a delegation to really participate on the indigenous side of things, but we ended up setting a little bit of the benchmark for how you can create some outcome in 4 days flat.
Interesting. So who was part of that delegation?
The delegation, so ironically, excuse me, it's not really the 3 o'clock start. That was the hay fever from about 2 weeks ago. So sorry, the guy coordinating the New Zealand delegation came out of a role that I threw to him. So ironically, after the APEC in Auckland, MB came to me and asked, could I help? And I didn't see it as particularly aligned to what I was trying to do in Gisborne at that time. But I'm happy to be corrected now, having gone. So Ricky Manarangi, excellent networker, excellent business perspective. He brought together a group of people that one, he either knew, or two, was referenced, and so there's some pretty heavy hitters, and there was a broad range of them. So I went specifically as a tech person, but also a person who comes from a very strong indigenous region, being Tairāwhiti. And it's because the fundamental problem is that 80% of the biodiversity on the planet is on lands owned by indigenous people, which is quite ironic that if you're talking about carbon neutral economies and how do we mitigate the disaster of climate change, it's going to be really hugely dependent on 1% of the population being the indigenous people who own those lands. And so the idea of a just transition, which is how does the planet do this without oppressing indigenous people further?
Yep.
It was one of the key sort of things. So the kind of people who went were people like Paul Morgan from Wakatū Corporation, Maui Solomon from the Moriori people, Tania Te Whenua from the Taumata Trade Group, Teresa Pollard, who's now the COO for Global Women. There was Toko Kapea, and a number of others. And so it was really quite a strong group, very credible, and also vocal in a good way.
Yeah, excellent. I guess you touched on a couple of things there which I find very interesting. So you went as Indigenous representation, and you mentioned the statistics around the amount of land in Indigenous ownership, and how that holds such a big stake in biodiversity now. It's, if you look at the land characteristics of New Zealand, what has been retained by Indigenous New Zealanders has typically been what the Crown couldn't create a corporate outcome for, or commercial outcome for, right? So there's this imbalance of what was considered land that was not suitable for a purpose now becoming so highly valued, but having no income associated. And I guess that's where you're talking about the making sure that there's not a further imbalance and further burden on the Indigenous landowners to do all this biodiversity work.
Yeah, because the challenge is if that's where sequestration resides, then the onus on those people is much higher than the average Joe who just lives in Auckland, for example. And if you look at the Tairāwhiti as an example, 62% of the land north of Kaiti on the sovereign domain of Ngāti Porou is still retained by Ngāti Porou ownership. That's a powerful statistics in any country, that 62% of a region is still in the hands of the Indigenous people. Now, and so that comment you made around the land that the government couldn't make productive, that's called marginal land, right? Just happens that marginal land is some of the best land for forest. But our forests are under tremendous pressure, as Graham Atkins would, he tells you every day of the week when he shows the photographs of the damage in the Raukura and that Raukumura National Park. So it's therein lies the big pressure. As you say, there's not enough money there for conservation, there's not enough money to do the kinds of programs. But the catch is the planet cannot afford not to. So at leadership forums like APEC, that's the best forum within which to understand that whole systemic structure in society around how we value planet and people, and not and ensure that profit isn't above both of those.
Absolutely. So you were there for 4 days. What was the program overall over those 4 days? Was it kind of structured?
Yes, very highly structured. So there were a number of panels, there were a number of thought leaders who came in and did one-on-one sessions where they were just speaking to their particular subject matter. The panels were quite solid. They would have, for instance, if it was an indigenous one, there'd be 4 leaders from around First Nations, Canada, US, and Māori, and it's kind of funny, this whole idea of indigenous. There's some people who say we're indigenous, and then there's some people who don't realise that they're indigenous, but wake up to it halfway through a conference like that. So, and I think it's that whole idea that unless you've been through colonial oppression, then I remember years ago, this was about 40 years ago, Sir Tairāwhiti and a delegation were at the UN, and somebody had asked them, what's your definition of indigenous? And they said, well, if you have to ask the question in the first place, then you're not. But what I found with the First Nations people is that given their experience of colonial oppression was similar to ours, and you naturally resonated with them. And so I think that there was huge value in understanding their experience, understanding that their experience was so parallel to ours, but the level of oppression was at a different scale. So I can remember one lady, I'm just trying to remember which tribe she was from. It might have been the Paiute people, and she said, the oppression of our culture in my family occurred at one moment, and she named the date. She said, when my ancestor was forcibly converted to Catholicism, 1605 AD.
Wow.
And the time scales.
Got a timestamp on it.
Yeah. And she's saying, so we've carried the pain and the reaction to that for that length of time, 400 years.
And it's only recent conversation that's been highlighting their oppression through film and things like that too. The way that they've been represented for near a century in media, and before that in print, and I'm sure it's
look. I think so. Certainly, Māori were a powerful presence in that forum at the APEC Just Transitions forum. We were powerful because culturally, we stand strong and tall, and when a bunch of Māoris stand together, you can see them from a mile away, because they're we openly debate and discuss the subject matter, whereas some of the others have come from an environment, particularly in the US and Canada, where the oppression has been such that they are, it's not fearful, but they have a much higher degree of humility because they have to. Because in some of those experiences in some of those countries, you were beaten, and we're talking no more than 20 years ago. You were beaten if you spoke your language, if you looked the wrong way at a white person, all those kinds of things. And we all understand those experiences in New Zealand, but there is a difference in the way Māori roll, and particularly in Tairāwhiti. I think I think it's a huge advantage to be from the Tairāwhiti, because particularly in Ngāti Porou, own 62% of your land, have a population which is substantial. Gisborne will be 70% Māori by 2040. We're already probably about 60% because, you know, the only census we can rely on was the 2013 one. And at that stage, that was 53% Māori. So we're probably at the 60% mark. So the world is going brown. And what that means is that as a Māori growing up, you don't have to apologise to colonialism. You know, you can walk down the streets here. Sure, your rate of arrest is probably going to be higher. You're probably going to be, you know, racially stereotyped, etc. But there's a difference, and I understood that difference when one day I was talking to a Hawaiian protester on Mount Mauna Kea, and I asked him why he was protesting on the 10,000 foot mark up the mountain. And he said, oh, because we've got a $13 billion project up on top of the mountain and no Hawaiian is employed. We have nothing. And he looked at me and he said, and I went, ooh. And he goes, why? How would you feel about that? And I said, if anybody came on Mount Hikurangi and tried to tell me what to do, I would kill them. It's a simple proposition. And he said, and that's why we love you cousins from New Zealand. He said, you guys come from a cold climate, you have a much colder way of looking at the world.
It's interesting because I've heard similar, well, not about the protest facts, but other experiences from Hawaii with engaging in New Zealand, and in particular, like, I don't know how many films I've ever seen come out with Hawaii as its location, but recently they were hiring a lot of Māori production crew for Hawaiian production, specifically to import the knowledge of production from New Zealand, because the American knowledge isn't making it there. So they're not gaining and developing their own production industry there because someone else is holding the reins.
Yeah.
And it's so yeah, they're not seeing that growth and development. So they're relying on Māori to bring knowledge in production fields.
And I think in some respect what I noticed at the APEC conference too was that it wasn't a case of dominating, but Māori were at the forefront of all the discussions that were going on over those 4 days, remembering that indigenous was only one of the sectors. But despite that, I guess, you know, the first thing is that we've come through the Treaty of Waitangi process, right? So we know what it's like to be to have experienced that, and so we have a different perspective on how we engage with power, and how you generate collaboration. So Māori highly collaborative, and I think that was one of the things is that, you know, I didn't know perhaps half the delegation, but as soon as we sat down and had a whakawhanaungatanga session before the whole thing started, we went out to a cafe as soon as we arrived. We all sat down, we went around the room. What are you here for? What are you looking to achieve? What do you know? We went all around, and mine was brutally honest. I said, I'm here for the Tairāwhiti. And that I was looking for tech deals. And that kind of honesty and openness meant that straight away everybody around the room became solution oriented. Oh, okay, well, we could do this with you, we could do that, we could do that. And then from there we just pivoted from there to the First Nations people, and they were offering, you know, relationships, partnerships and opportunities. But some of the scale over there is just, you know, off the planet. I mean, there's one young guy, he's from the Cree Nation in Canada, and his thing was, well, I don't get out of bed for anything less than 100 million US as a project. And he said, but he said, despite that, he said, disregard that. He said, I want to come to New Zealand for ceremony. So that's their word for tikanga, you know, ceremony. And he said, when I explained to him what life is like in Tūranga and Tairāwhiti, he said, I will bring my chiefly dress, I'll bring my drum, we will come to do ceremony. Oh, and I'll bring my pipe. That's what he said, yeah. So just, you know, and what I liked about that was, it wasn't business wasn't the first thing. Profit comes after people and planet. So he came to, first of all, he wants to come first of all to connect those indigenous people to work on the planet, and then we find profit later.
So you, so just transition obviously is a massive subject at the moment. Was there a standout talk for you? Was there something that you grabbed hold of and absorbed and want to share? Like,
yeah, there was. It was really ironic because, you know, I'm usually so very commercially focused. There were two, in fact. One was just trying to remember what, I think she was of the Blackfeet Nation, and she said, in the morning she said, lovely day, everybody was commenting on, because we came out of winter here, how mild it was in San Francisco and how nice the sun was, especially coming out of Tairāwhiti. And she said, oh yes, I got up early this morning, went down to do my prayers down on the waterfront. And we went, ooh, that's interesting. What's that? And she goes, oh, we pray to to our ancestor God. And she named it, a big long name. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And she said, you have to understand that our biggest challenge is our language. That that her old people had shared with her, if you don't speak our language, and particularly our dialect, the gods cannot hear you. And there were two things going on there for me. One was dialect, because I don't speak Māori, I speak Ngāti. And number two, the gods. I'm not so great on the God bit, but the point is that they could see fundamentally how important their language was for anchoring their culture, which carries their values, which is who they are before the business.
yeah.
You see how it all connects? So that was a major insight, was to understand that if we lose the Ngāti dialect, then you cannot authentically transmit the Ngāti culture and its values to your next generation.
So you start losing your whakapapa in a way, you start losing your connection to Mataranga Māori.
Yeah, then you become Queen Street Māori. That's a polite way I put it. You become disconnected from your land and who you are and your stories.
Yeah,
because
which many of us are anyway. Many of us are urbanised Māori.
That's right. That's right. But the obligation on people like myself and many others in this town, we're lucky we've got numbers in the Tairāwhiti, is to revitalise and retain that for all of our cousins who don't have it. So if I worry about trying to fix everybody, I'll just sort of do myself in an early grave. But if I do it with the subset that can, then you get things done.
So it seems like you made some good, solid strategic partnerships while you were there.
The opportunity for them.
Opportunity for them, for sure. What do you think were there key lessons that the Tairāwhiti can take from your participation? Is there something that applies to us all?
Oh, totally. There's a big outcome coming, which is that it's always great to be lifted up out of the region and taken away so that you've got a clean sheet of paper and people ask you what's your greatest challenges and all those sort of things. And then you've got a point of reference for them, right? Whereas if you sit at home, then you're just going to talk to your cousins And, you know, to be honest, while we all admire that insights come from good customer interaction in the region, the reality is a wider pool of insight and experiences to be gathered from going outside. So I think the big insight that I got was I never thought of myself as an environmentalist. I certainly still don't think like that. But things I do in sport are naturally in that environment. But because I'm looking at it through a Māori lens, I just say, well, that's what you've got to do to retain the culture. So for instance, an example is on my land, my family land at our pā Penu up at near the Makarika turnoff just south of Hiruharama. We have actually seen for the first time, it's been happening for gradually over a few years, but we have now seen the real effect of what climate change is doing. We have a canyon that's opened on our hill, which because of the compound weather events is beyond any experience we've ever had or ever imagined it could ever go like that. What it could potentially mean is that, so slippage, so landsliding and that sort of thing, generally happens at around about something like 23 degrees. Today we're seeing it happen at 11 degrees because my land's 11 degrees. Now that is beyond all the science that anybody ever predicted in terms of land slippage and that sort of thing. What that means is with all of that slippage is that the places that, so here's the catch, many people around this area can recite their whakapapa from the founding ancestor Tairāwhiti down to their founding marae, their tipuna marae. That's generally about 10 generations ago. From that founding ancestor of their marae to themselves is about another 10 generations. But if you ask them the question, can you take me and walk across the land from Tairāwhiti all the way to yourself and show me where they lived? Most of these people can do it from Tairāwhiti to their marae because that's the most popular thing to do. But from their marae 10 generations ago to themselves, there's a massive breakdown there. Where I come from, we can do that. So I can say, oh, my 6th great-grandfather lived there, 5th great-grandmother lived there, on that piece of land. The way that slippage is going is there will be those places will no longer exist. That's the risk. That's a direct risk to a systemic loss of culture that I never predicted in shifting back to Gisborne 4 years ago. So that sort of thing is going to have a powerful erosive effect on our culture and our ability to practice it, and also on our ability to maintain our mana as the hosts on the marae when we say, well, we come from here, but I don't know where my ancestors were because it's gone.
Yep.
And the unfortunate thing is that's slipping down into the river basins and out to sea.
Yep.
So understanding that, and then understanding that any solutions we need to do have to be commercially built, driven and distributed, but also not at the expense of our culture. So we have to take the culture along with commerce. So the big outcome for me was coming back from that and understanding, right, there are niche funds overseas for investment in these kinds of things, particularly if they have a tech aspect to them. So the big opportunity I've seen is to understand what is the biggest need, particularly after the zombie apocalypse, the compound weather events of Hale and Gabriel. 2.25 million tonnes of water were put up into the atmosphere from the Tonga volcano a year and a half ago. Met Office claims that their modelling shows no effect. Well, it's just patently at odds with practice, which is you put 2.25 million tonnes of water into the atmosphere and ash. That was the largest volcano in recorded human history. In general, other volcanoes that we see around the planet, they take 2 years on average for all that stuff to come out of the atmosphere. The planet, the equator, it goes around east to west, west to east, in terms of rotation, and that creates an effect called the Coriolis effect, which means that all of our weather patterns south of the equator go clockwise and anti-clockwise up top. So the line from Tonga volcano around that clock is direct line to the Tairāwhiti of New Zealand. So so it's something that I'm trying to track through to understand, but it just patently does not make any sense that 2.25 million tonnes of water ain't going to come down somewhere inside that 2 years. According to Met Office, their modelling shows that's not the case. But unfortunately, I think I lived through some practical proof that nobody ever predicted Hal and Gabriel as a systemic event. So a whole year of, so on the run up to Hal and Gabriel, in a year, less than a year and a half, we had a 100-year flood event, two 20-year flood events, and three 10-year flood events.
Yeah. The scale's all wrong.
I mean, call me dumb, but even I'm saying, well.
Yeah. We didn't just get the 100, 1 in 100. We got the whole 100 years worth of events in a year.
You got all
So that's it from us at Exchange Cafe today. Huge ngā mihi to Barry. What a wonderful speaker, and always good to catch up with a friend. Don't forget to follow and contribute to the Exchange Cafe at exchangecafe.co.nz. Mā te wā.